I think that was really the period in his life where he just decided to redo himself utterly, and he became a whole different person. There were a lot of people in his life who he knew before that didn't fit into that world very well. I certainly didn't, and didn't want to. He was so different that it was as though he couldn't be his old self anymore. Carl Willers.
Little by little, as he moved further and further into the spotlight of his own increasing celebrity, the boyish, faintly elfin and open vulnerability of his younger days began to give way to an increasingly inscrutable public persona, modeled in part on the hip and sometimes sullen outward demeanor of Billy Lynnock's Mole People.
I don't really understand.
Once voluble enough, he rarely laughed or spoke in public now, and when he did, adopted a strange, emotionless voice that some compared to Jackie Kennedy's public speaking style.
I'm so empty today, I can't think of anything. Why don't you just tell me the words and they'll just come out of my mouth? No, don't worry about it, because No, I think it'd be so nice.
At the same time, his studied insistence on his own shallowness now reached a new extreme. If you want to know all about Andy Warhol, he insisted, just look at the surface of my paintings and my films, and there I am. There's nothing behind it.
See, he was two different people. If you want to get really simplistic, there was the public persona and then there was a private persona. He always said he couldn't draw, okay? But he was a great draftsman at the same time. You know, he said he couldn't read or didn't like to read. He read all the time. He was a good conversationalist, but then in public, the screen went down and his persona that he created, this artwork of himself, comes forward.
And then you made...
And then I made...
things like...
An effacement of personality, which was at the same time an assertion of personality. And he got that right away, because he was a very smart guy. You know, so if I pretend to have no personality at all, I'll be Andy Warhol. And that's more powerful. What you mustn't do is try to have a personality, put on an act, because I don't know how to put on an act. So put on no act. Just let it all fade away. And that worked for him. And it was a very interesting insight into the nature of the personality in a world of personalities and celebrities.
Nothing that had come before in Warhol's career could have prepared the world for the astonishing burst of creative energy that began to explode from the factory almost as soon as he took occupancy in the waning days of January 1964. From the start, the sheer size of the new space, nearly 5,000 square feet in all, made it possible to contemplate entirely new kinds of projects, faster in number and vaster in scale. And within days of moving in, he and his assistant Gerard Malanga were hard at work handcrafting 400 wooden sculptures, made to look as much as possible like ordinary grocery boxes.
You can look back at photographs of the studio when he's making the box sculptures in February and March of '64, only a month after he's been in the studio. And the box sculptures are laid out on the floor of the studio, lined up, box by box, on brown paper, being painted by hand and then silkscreened one at a time, and it looks just like an assembly line, looks like a factory. In fact, it's the first time where you really get a sense that what's still basically, of course, a cottage industry is being accelerated. The momentum's increasing, the quantity is increasing. It becomes much more like a factory. Between '64 and '68, he produces 3 times as many works as he does between '61 and '63, but his sense of the momentum is constant. Maybe it's just the quantities that are shifting. So many of the breakthroughs of what we think of as the breakthroughs are going on constantly.
That spring, as the first box sculptures rolled off the assembly line at the factory, dramatic proof came that his paintings had lost none of their power to create shock and outrage. Asked to create a giant mural for the New York State Pavilion at the 1964 World's Fair, he settled on a series of criminal mugshots drawn from the files of the FBI. The giant 20 by 20 foot multi-paneled silkscreen, called The 13 Most Wanted Men, had just gone up when on April 16, 1964, a week before the fair was to open, the architect Philip Johnson called to inform him that Governor Nelson Rockefeller himself had deemed the piece offensive and insisted it be replaced within 24 hours. When Warhol suggested replacing the mugshots with a giant image of the fair's president, Robert Moses, Johnson angrily dismissed the notion. In the end, Warhol had the mural painted over in silver. "That'll be my art," he said. Six days later, on April 21st, 1964, Warhol's grocery boxes went on display for the first time. A huge crowd of curious onlookers lined up around the block, eager to see the show. "You could barely get in," Robert Indiana recalled. "It was like going through a maze."
Andy, a Canadian government spokesman said that your art could not be described as original sculpture. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Why do you agree?
Well, because it's not original.
You have just then copied a common item.
Yes.
Well, why have you bothered to do that? Why not create something new?
Because it's easier to do.
Well, isn't this sort of a joke then that you're playing on the public?
No. It gives me something to do.